And inside one of the boxes, I discovered or rediscovered a play that I wrote when I was about 10 years old called Little Red Riding Hood Says No to Smoking. I just had a moment, a real click, a pop, I call it in the book, where I recognized myself. And I knew deep down that this was the person that I was, but because I had been listening to other people's advice and counseling along the way of my journey, I really struggled with accepting this is who I really was. But the way in which I tell that story, the words that I choose, right? Me putting myself in first character to show my vulnerabilities, to display my core values in the way that I'm telling that story, but not just the way that I'm telling that story, in the actions that I took in the story itself. What it comes down to for me is, what questions are you asking to get the information that you need in order to be successful in that company? And a lot of it has to do with the culture of the company. I think it starts with a reality check. And what I mean by that is, if you have a company that's been around for 10, 20, 30 years, and you are still operating with the same mission, with the same traditions, with the same policies that you have had in place for a decade or more, oh my gosh, has the world changed? Well, I think it has to come from leadership, right? Because that's the power dynamic, right? The questions have to be asked by leadership, but who are they asking the questions to? Why we are coming together to provide this service or this product. But that doesn't always carry through or permeate the culture of the company. I really see the Barbie movie as an example of a story in evolution, right? And I talk about evolution a lot because I don't think we always give ourselves grace to change our mind and to become a better version of ourselves.
This is the Business Philosopher Within You podcast. I'm your host, Bhavesh Naik. Something that we love to explore on this podcast is building a company culture that allows us to explore the depth of what it means to be a human being. An important tool for exploring this inherent humanness is the art and craft of storytelling that gets us in touch with our deepest essence. To explore this discipline of storytelling, I've invited a very special guest to join us. Carrie Klewin Lawrence is a stage director, strategic storytelling expert, author, and personal branding coach. Carrie works with entrepreneurs, business leaders, and creatives to overcome imposter syndrome, clarify core values, and create personalized measures of success. As the author of Origin Story, Carrie weaves strategic storytelling into a journey of self-discovery and forward action, encouraging readers to control their self-narrative and achieve their goals. As she likes to say, when you change your story, you change your life. I am pleased to have you on this podcast, Carrie.
Hi, Bhavesh. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Something that I wanted to kind of challenge you with a little bit. Origin Story is the book that you wrote. And if you could give us an example of a story, if you can tell us a little story that sort of brings together some of the elements that you talk about in this book into a finished product in some way, shape, or form. It doesn't have to be the whole thing, but some aspects of it.
Sure. I can tell you the story of what really set this book into motion for me and brought a lot of pieces of my personal puzzle together.
That would be great.
Which was, I was moving across country and I was near my mom's house, and she handed me a couple of boxes of memorabilia from when I was a kid, elementary school. And I, you can imagine I was not excited to have more boxes to add to the packing. But one day I decided to open them because my kids are about that same age. And I thought, I could show them something. Look at what your mom did when she was your age. And inside one of the boxes, I discovered or rediscovered a play that I wrote when I was about 10 years old
Mm-hmm.
called Little Red Riding Hood Says No to Smoking.
Oh, wow. Uh-huh.
And I had this piece of paper in my hand, this evidence,
Right.
of who I was at that age and who I have known myself to be for decades. And I just had a moment, a real click, a pop, I call it in the book,
Mm-hmm.
where I recognized myself. And I knew deep down that this was the person that I was, but because I had been listening to other people's advice and
Yeah.
counseling along the way of my journey, I really struggled with accepting this is who I really was. And when I had that piece of paper in my hand that had been many decades ago, I realized that I had been on the right path all along. And
Wow.
that, yeah, it was a real moment of clarity for me.
Yeah, that's sweet. I love that. Yeah. So the origin story, that's the name of the book.
Yeah.
What was the inspiration behind writing that book?
Well, so when I had that moment of clarity as a result of finding that script, I got really excited because so many pieces fell into place. And then almost at the same time, I got so frustrated at
Uh-huh.
at realizing that I had struggled for so many years and felt like maybe I could have avoided that
Right.
struggle and all of that confusion and conflict of trying to be this artist and this entrepreneur. And so I went on a personal journey of trying to figure out where I had gone awry, the detours that I had taken.
Sure.
And as I started to do that, I also started to realize that there were some stories that I had been telling myself
Mm-hmm.
that were not actually true. That
Uh-huh.
once I had this evidence and once I started asking questions of people who knew me when I was younger and started really digging into some of my core memories, I started to revise my story a little bit, which
Yeah.
gave me a lot of confidence in moving forward on and achieving goals that I wasn't sure I had the right to pursue before all of that,
Right. Sure.
all of that research.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
And so I wanted to figure out a way because I'm a stage director and I love storytelling, and I've seen how much storytelling can help people gain confidence and really control the way that they represent themselves, the way you introduce yourself, the way you maneuver through an interview process, for example, or put your story out on social media. And I've been working with branding for a number of years as well.
Sure.
Well, actually a couple of decades now.
Yeah.
And I thought maybe I can help other people put the pieces of their story together so that they can move forward too and not feel stuck.
Sure. The storytelling that you speak of, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, is the storytelling that's more introspective. We call it, I think you call it self-discovery, as in self-exploration.
Right.
And going under the layers of who I am, this person here and that person there.
Right.
Can you speak on that a little bit more? What's the difference between a self-explorative storytelling versus just storytelling in general?
Sure. So what I focus on is what I would call personal discovery storytelling, where I'm really thinking about the stories that I know in my life, where those stories come from. For example, if I think, in order to go to this interview, I need to dress in a certain way and my resume needs to look a certain way. That's because I, at some point, learned those lessons, whether it's from an industry or whether it was from professors or mentors or something. And if we don't take the time to kind of look around and say, you know what, that doesn't match who I am and the life that I'm living, then we start to feel conflicted, right? I have this interest in expressing myself in an artistic way, lots of color And for
Yeah.
many years, I also worked in corporate where it was very kind of conservative dress and dark colors and all of these
Yeah.
things.
Beige
Right. And that's
walls.
right.
Yeah.
That's a small
Yeah.
example, but it didn't
Sure.
reflect who I was on the inside. So I kind of felt
Right.
like I was pretending and I wasn't being my authentic self in those
Right. Right.
situations, right? Like
Right.
I was
Sure.
hiding the
Sure.
color,
Sure. Yeah.
right?
Right. Right. Yeah. Exactly.
Right. And that
Exactly.
applies to our values,
Yeah.
our activities, our passions.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of
Sure.
times we're taught,
Absolutely.
especially in the professional world, to keep our personal and professional lives separate,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Yeah. 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 And we'll get into that. I really want to get into that because that's
Yeah.
kind of a wacky concept to me. And I don't know if that's relevant in this new day and age. I hope it's not relevant because hopefully that state workplace will have some color in it. Yeah, I agree
Yeah.
with you. So, having said that, so if we can go back a little bit to storytelling
Yeah.
and this form of storytelling that we're exploring, self exploration and self discovery. I like to, and you can take it into a extreme basic of a story. The story that you told.
Yeah.
There's the Little Red Riding Hood, and then you found this box and in the attic, and then you discovered something that you had forgotten or you thought you had forgotten.
Right.
So, when we look at a story, Hans Christian Andersen, right? In fairy tales. So we've been loving stories throughout the ages, and it's such a beautiful way to connect with people and do so many different things, right? And people are even storytelling now in data world and
Yeah.
AI world, and those so it's not going away. So, what is the absolute basic element, fundamental element of storytelling? Do you think is?
Well, I realized in you asking me this question that I didn't quite answer your last one, which was the difference between telling someone else's story or
Right.
telling kind of a myth or,
Yeah.
we the idea of an origin story we often attribute to heroes and villains, right? How they
Right.
got
Yeah.
started, how they
Yeah.
had that moment of change.
Right.
Whereas the origin story that I'm talking about is that personal journey and the way that you operate in the world, right? Your
Yeah.
actions.
Sure.
So
Sure.
any story can demonstrate an objective. Like I'm going to teach you
Yeah.
a lesson. And so
Right.
I'm going to use this story to teach you a lesson of, the
Sure.
lion and the mouse, for
Sure.
example.
Yeah. Right.
Right. And I
Mm-hmm.
can find examples of that in my own life. But
Yeah.
the way in which I tell that story, the words that I choose, right?
Yeah.
Me putting myself in first character to show
Right.
my vulnerabilities, to display my core values in
Right.
the way that I'm telling that story, but not just the way that I'm telling that story, in the actions that I took in the
Mm-hmm.
story itself, right? I'm the
Sure.
character. I'm the main
Right.
character.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So any story has the power to affect other people's hearts and minds and
Sure.
to make those connections
Yeah.
by allowing ourselves, storytellers don't exist without an audience, right?
That's
And
true. Yeah.
so the whole premise behind the story is to connect with
Yeah.
that audience member.
Right.
Right?
Oh, yeah.
And what I
Yes.
do is really help people to understand how to make those connections and
Mm-hmm.
why they're making those connections,
Sure.
and then to strengthen them. Right?
Yes. Right. Right. That's a terrific insight, right? With what you just said, that a storyteller cannot exist in a vacuum.
Right.
Storytelling has an audience, right? Or a storyteller has an audience, or there is no story. The story is not going to go anywhere without an audience. And yet, there is also, I would say, is there. So you said that the storytelling is about me. I think you said something like that, right? So there is a character in a story,
Mm-hmm.
and you said hero and villain, and we are the hero of our story. So if it's a self-explorative journey, I am the main character in a way.
Right.
Is that so I'm the protagonist?
Yes.
And the story is about me. I'm the hero of my own story.
Right. Exactly.
Right? And then that hero goes through a journey.
Right.
So some of the things that you talked about, that happens along the way, right?
Right.
So in your book, do you speak about or do you talk about any steps that you go through to make this come alive, this character and the journey and the actions that him or her they take.
Right. So I talk a little bit about the hero's journey, which is a very popular
I love hero's journey.
right,
Yeah.
system
Joseph
and
Campbell,
structure, right?
Yes,
So that you
yeah.
can find the pieces. But I also talk about Dan Harmon's story circle, which is very
right.
similar, but
Yeah.
the basis of it is that a person in a state of comfort or their normal life, they realize that they need something, right? They realize, and I call that stormy weather, when you feel like something's kind of off. You're not quite sure what it is. You just have that sensation of this isn't a good fit for me, or I want something else.
Right.
And as a result, there becomes a call to adventure, right?
Yes.
Exploration to figure out, to solve the question of what is that feeling based on.
Right.
So they go and search for the answers to that question.
Right.
Hopefully they find an answer or some options for making a change.
Yeah.
They make a change in their life as a result of this new realization, because it's one of those cases of once you see it or once you understand it, you can't, sometimes you can't let go of it, right?
Yeah, sure.
You make that change, which can cause some discomfort, right?
Sure.
I talk a little bit about evolution and how change comes at a price, which is one of the places that people often get stuck, right? Because it's a little bit of a risk to make a change in your life. We have habits. We're very comfortable with these, even if they don't work for us.
Right.
It's a sensation of, I know what I'm I know what I'm getting myself into, right? I can put up with it.
Right.
But when you make those changes, then you have an experience of what's called a new normal. Right?
Yes. It's a
because
different plateau. You're right.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so then the circle starts again. Right?
Sure.
But what I love about it is the idea that it's an upward circle. It's an upward spiral.
Yeah.
And so every change you make and every realization that you make is the possibility for a new future with more satisfaction and more comfort.
Absolutely.
At the end.
Yeah. So, and I love that. So the name that you mentioned was Melville.
Dan Harmon's story circle.
Dan Harmon, sorry. Okay. Dan Harmon's story circle. Which, and I see some parallels, but then you also mentioned The Hero's Journey, which is by Joseph Campbell.
Right,
and
exactly.
I saw some parallels there because I'm familiar with that story, and I'm writing a book, so I'm kind of familiar with some of this, the terminology and the template.
Yeah.
So, because you mentioned it, can you kind of draw some the similarities between the two? Or
they're
the
very similar, extremely similar. The reason that I prefer using the story circle is that a lot of people who are going through this kind of moment of realization or change or discomfort, they don't consider themselves a hero in that moment.
Right.
And so I find that people have a harder time latching on to this idea of I'm the hero, right?
Great
it's
point.
easier, I think, to look backwards and to say I was a hero and I worked through that and I accomplished it.
Sure.
But as people are working through these complicated situations, whether it's a career pivot or retirement or even trying to pick a career in the first place, I think it's a little bit more difficult for people to say, yes, I'm the hero in this story. Right?
You may seem like a hero to yourself in the hindsight, but while you're going through it, it doesn't feel that way.
Yeah, but I will tell you that a lot of my work also has to do with discovering antagonists. You know, you talked about the protagonist earlier.
Sure.
I use a term called kryptonite, which is also very related to you know, heroes and villains.
Yeah.
But kryptonite for me is identifying those anti-values in your life, those experiences of clarity, because you had that experience and you thought afterwards, never again. I'm going to avoid that at all costs.
Stay away from that. Yeah.
Right? And so I think that those are very clarifying moments, and sometimes there are villains involved with kryptonite. Absolutely.
Yeah. And I'll tell you, it's sometimes it's difficult for people to grasp this, but sometimes we are also the villain.
Yes.
As in we have some of these characteristics and traits. We're not perfect. We're all human beings, right? And hopefully the protagonist wins out against the antagonist, even in the personal story.
Right.
And we see this in many movies where they kind of, someone is going through this personal struggle. That the hero is not always perfect, right?
Right.
They have some flaws.
Absolutely.
And yet the benevolence wins out against the malevolence, so to speak.
Yeah. Well, you
Right?
cannot have a good story without an antagonist. It
Sure.
just doesn't work.
Yeah,
it's not
that's true.
exciting. You can't really connect to an audience that way. We really crave the story of the challenge, the obstacle, and overcoming something.
Yeah.
And antagonists exist in 3 different ways: yourself, another person, or a system. A system could be like the educational system, or the judicial system, or Mother Nature could be a system in that. So they come in many different factors, but yes, the one that often appears in personal discovery stories is the self, right? So it takes some courage to look in that mirror and say, okay, what kind of resistance have we been dealing with, and what kind of obstacles? And to be honest, that really has a lot to do with taking a close look at the stories you've been telling yourself.
Yeah, sure.
Right?
Sure.
You talked earlier about the audience.
Yeah.
You can be your own audience. And let me just tell you that it's so powerful when you have been repeating the same narrative to yourself over and over and over again, and not challenging it, not interrogating the reasons why and the source of the information that you are repeating. I'll give you a quick example, which I think a lot of people could relate to.
Yeah.
I am not a big fan of math.
Okay.
And for a long time, many, many years, I said, I'm not good at math. And in fact, my husband handles the math lessons with our kids as a result of that. Can I just tell you that in that box with the play script, I found an award for being like a top math student when I was younger.
Wow.
Right? So I had been telling myself this story that I'm not any good at it. The truth is, I just don't enjoy it that much. But I'm actually really good at it when I focus on it. So that's just a small example of how we can tell ourselves something and we can just start repeating that, even though it's not actually based in truth.
Sure. And that's a powerful story also, because, we have barriers that we've built inside. We call it belief systems or conditioning or whatever you have, right? Whatever you call it. And that can get in the way. Those are major roadblocks that we create within ourselves that can stop us from doing that we want to do, right?
Absolutely.
Or want to achieve, or even sometimes just being happy, right? Because it's not a good feeling to believe that, hey, I'm not so good at math, right? Well, you are. You may not ever go and get an accounting job,
right?
But having the confidence that I'm good with math and I'm competent, right there, that kind of opens things up, somewhere in here, and that makes you a more confident, more clear person.
Absolutely.
Who's around in the world with a certain level of ease, right?
Absolutely.
You talked about branding, right? You help folks with branding, and this, a lot of these things that we talked about, the writing formula, if I can call them that, and a lot of the things that we talked about and things that you address in your book, they apply so beautifully to not just branding, but also sales world, where, you have a prospect, someone who, you have a product or a service, and then you have a prospect who needs that. That they need it. But they say, no, thank you very much. I'm comfortable. I'm okay. But then something happens in their life that makes them go on a search and say, how do I solve this problem, right?
Right.
My home isn't big enough, or my deck isn't pretty enough, or my business isn't making enough money, or any of those things, right?
Right.
And then you search for a solution to that problem, and the product or service, if it's the right fit, may be an answer, right? So the question I have for you is that, in the branding and sales perspective, if I'm a branding person, I need to brand my product or service. I'm assuming that we need to kind of see them as not necessarily the hero, but I like to see them as a hero,
Right.
in that story. So my role, so in many of these stories, there is this. In Hero's Journey, I think there is an idea of a guide, or someone who is an
Mentor.
external agent or mentor,
Yeah.
who shows up. Like in
Mhm.
Harry Potter, we
Yeah.
have the owl who shows up with the little letter, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And Harry says, "No, I'm happy. I'm fine. I'm living in my
Right.
uncle's closet, but I'm fine. Everything is okay, right?"
Right.
But the crow is saying, "No, no, no, no. You got something that you don't know you have. And I'm bringing you that message. There's so much waiting for you that can't even imagine yet." And he says, "No, I'm fine." All right. So there's this resistance to going on the journey, and then there is an external stimulus that basically prods you along and say, "No, what's the? Can you talk about that a little bit? What's the role of this external influence that we bring into play in our story?"
Absolutely. So two things I think are at play as far as the way that I have outlined things. And one
Yeah.
is those outside voices,
Yeah.
which play into personal measures of success. And we can
Right.
come back to that.
Yeah.
But it's, I think, a struggle between the outside voices and your inner voice,
Right.
right?
Sure.
I knew at 10 years old that I was interested in telling stories for social change. Like, this
Yeah.
is something that I
Yeah.
have done,
Right.
since I since I began telling stories.
Sure.
But outside voices said, that's not valuable. That's
Yeah.
not going
Yeah.
to
Right.
that's not going to get you a real job. That's not
Sure.
going to provide for you and make you
Yeah.
happy.
Yeah.
Right? These were all outside voices and what I
Sure.
would consider well-intentioned bad advice.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
Right?
Well, at the time that the advice was given, it was probably good advice, or may not have
Yeah.
been, but it might have been good. But then we just kind of carry that with ourselves the rest of our lives.
Right. And
Yeah.
so I knew who I was, and I
Right.
knew that I had these gifts, and I
Yeah.
knew that I was interested in pursuing. I didn't know what a stage director was when I was that
Right.
young. I
Yeah.
didn't know what, a storytelling strategist would, what kind of work I would be doing many
Yeah.
years later. But I did know that I believed in this set of values
Mm-hmm.
that I wanted to pursue. But I was told that I needed to pursue a particular job title, for
Sure.
example,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so I think what happens for a lot of people is that we are given limited options.
Yeah. Right.
When I went to college, they did not have a degree in theater. So I
Mhm.
didn't pursue
Wow.
it, right? The
Yeah.
message there was, this is not valuable.
Sure.
And so I pursued one of the careers that was available. We're still doing that to people
Yeah.
now, right?
Yeah. Right.
And if you think about the world 5, 10, 20 years ago and how much it has changed,
Yeah.
I really believe that we can't predict the future. Like, who are we to say that this job is going to exist in 5 years when you
That's true.
graduate,
Yeah.
right? But we can prepare. And I
Yeah.
think the only way we can do that is to get to know ourselves and to be okay
Yeah.
with the fact that we don't know all of the answers at the moment,
Right.
and that there are going to be opportunities in 5 or 10 years that never existed when we
Yeah.
were trying to make these decisions, right?
Sure. Yeah.
But if I'm clear about my values, I can take those values and apply them to many different opportunities, many different
Absolutely.
industries,
Sure.
right? So
Sure.
it's no longer me trying to figure out and predict the future. It's
Yeah.
me pursuing the values, the audience I want to serve, the problem I want to solve, and doing that with a core set of beliefs and values.
Sure. When you advise companies, right?
Yeah.
And those are powerful thoughts that you just shared, which is, I think what you're saying is that, don't worry about the resume and, the positions that are listed, because who knows, they may or may not even exist 5-10 years down the road. So follow this, right? Explore within yourself what your strengths and weaknesses are, and my terminology, and then find that something within you that those are your values, and stay true to those values, and then find that passion, for the lack of a better term, something that just kind of sings in you, and then look for opportunities where those can be applied, right? In terms of career prospects and things like that. Your theater career is, being a stage director is a great example of that, because the degree didn't even exist at the time, but then you followed your passion, and somehow you are in this position pursuing what you're passionate about, and having written a book, right? So and that's a difficult thing for a lot of people to follow, and I see this all the time, because when you look at it from the other side, if I'm a manager hiring, right, and recruitment today is the way it is. You have this ATS systems, and your resume can't even get to the right people if you don't have the right keywords in your resume, right?
Right.
So forget about even your passion and those things. You have to have the right keywords in your resume.
Right.
Those are A, B, C, X, Y, Z that are kind of matched to the position description that they put. Otherwise, it doesn't even get seen by the real person, and then that person is going to see for 10 seconds. You have a stack of resume and going through. So anyway, I paint a dire picture, but I think there is hope in this. That the idea that you're proposing is so powerful, because as a career professional, I need to do this self-discovery process, right?
Right.
And then there's probably some process of elimination, not elimination, but assimilation of what is out there. And then I still have to do something in my resume. But if I'm the manager, do you have any advice on people who are inside a business, trying to recruit, trying to onboard certain types of people, trying to kind of train them and mold them in a certain way so that they can do their job function that the best way that they can possibly do? Right?
Yeah.
So what would be your advice to hire, recruit, and train and place and work with them in the right way, if there is such a thing, from your perspective?
Absolutely. Totally. I think that a lot of these job descriptions, they are a list of actions or products, or ways of working. But what they lack is a value system, right? And I'm not just saying
on the side of the corporate,
right?
folks.
Well,
Yeah,
yes,
sure.
and both. I mean,
Yeah.
so if I'm asking, can you type this many words per minute?
Right.
Right? That is an action, and that is a skill. But that doesn't mean that you're going to get along with your coworker.
That's true.
That doesn't mean that you are going to, be innovative and a good problem solver.
Sure.
Right?
Sure.
So what it comes down to for me is, what questions are you asking to get the information that you need in order to be successful in that company? And a lot of it has to do with the culture of the company, right? If you want someone just to come in and do transcription, and you don't care about the value system, or they're not interacting with people, that's one thing, right? But when you hire someone based on sales numbers, and then they come in and disrupt the entire culture because they can't get along with people, and their working methods are not they don't work well with other
others,
people.
right? Yeah, yeah,
Right?
yeah.
Right? That
Sure,
can
sure,
work
sure.
in certain companies.
Yeah, sure. Right,
We
right.
value people who are cutthroat and will do
Yeah,
anything to make a sale. And
yeah.
in other companies, it's like, no, the
It's
culture
different
here is
value system,
important.
right? Yeah, right,
Absolutely.
right.
But we
Yeah,
treat them all the same.
exactly, exactly.
Right? The
Yeah,
resumes
right,
all
right.
look the same.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
exactly, exactly. Yeah,
right? And
yeah,
so how do you get the information? What questions are you asking?
yeah.
Because you have really taken the time to think about the mission of your company, the
Yes,
mission of the team
right,
within that company,
right, right.
right?
Yeah,
Because that can also be culturally different.
absolutely, absolutely. Yeah,
A team who's, an IT team and a marketing team are going to
yeah.
have maybe completely different cultures and completely different value systems,
Sure, sure.
right?
Yeah, yeah,
So I think that the responsibility really relies on HR, which, having spent quite a few uh, years working with people in HR, and
yeah.
I understand that they are often very, very tied. Their hands are tied, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because they're trying to fill this bucket list,
Yeah,
these unicorn uh, lists of qualities for a
right.
candidate for
Yeah,
leadership
sure.
who are not actually working one-on-one with these people.
Yeah, yeah.
Right?
Right,
So they
right,
might not even understand exactly what kind of a person that they are looking for
right,
to
right.
fulfill those jobs,
Sure, sure,
right?
sure.
It might be an
Yeah,
industry standard. Oh, you
yeah.
need to have X number of sales and,
Right.
this quantity or this
Yeah,
sales number, right?
sure.
But how did you get there? How did you
Yeah,
make those sales, right?
exactly.
It's a
Right, right.
question.
And yeah, and that's a great point. I would even say that it's not just HR, it's also, and I think you were alluding to this, that HR has a limited role in this.
Yeah,
But then the hiring manager and hiring managers, plural, also
yeah,
all the way up to the CEO of the company. That you talked about the mission of the value of the business or the enterprise, the organization, and then within that you also said values, right? So there's
right.
mission, there's probably vision of what they want to be or where they want to be 5-10 years down the road. What's the mission? What's their passion, and what is it that they bring to the world, and then within that there's a value system, there's a roadmap. Like these are the things, the protagonist and antagonist. These are the things that we want. These are the things that we don't want.
Yeah,
So there is a story there, right? That this is, as a corporate entity, we can be telling a story
right.
that this is who we are, right? And collectively speaking, right? Uh, so do you see that, or is that something that resonates with you, where corporate itself needs to kind of go through some kind of soul searching, in a way, self exploration, to create some kind of a template of what it is that they need to look for from this perspective
Sure.
in
I
a
mean,
in an employee?
absolutely. I think
Yeah.
it starts with a reality check.
Yes.
And what I
Yeah.
mean by
Yeah.
that is, if you have a company that's been around for 10, 20, 30 years,
Right.
and you
Right.
are still operating with the same mission,
Sure.
with the same traditions, with the same
Right.
policies that you
Yeah.
have had in place for a decade or more, oh
Yeah.
my gosh, has the world changed? This
Tell
recent
me about
call
it.
for
Yeah.
people to come back to the workplace
Yeah.
without really investigating the storytelling of the company or the
Yeah.
physical space, for
Sure.
example,
Sure. Sure.
right? You're
Yeah.
just going to say, well, before the pandemic, everybody worked, 9 to 5 or
Mm-hmm.
seven
Yeah.
to 7,
Right.
whatever it was,
Yeah.
without complaining. So let's do
Mm-hmm.
that again
Sure.
without really investigating the why behind it or the
Yeah.
how.
Yeah.
Um, you know, for me to go to an office and sit in a cubicle, or even worse, an open
Mm-hmm.
space. Oh,
Yeah.
don't we just love an open space where
Right.
everyone can interrupt you
Sure.
every minute of the day, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And for a lot of people, there's so much noise, it's hard to concentrate.
It's
What
true.
if I'm way more productive in my own house,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
Um,
Right. Yeah.
So not to say that there isn't, some of it is just fairness. Okay, we're just going to say
Yeah.
everyone has to do this. But
Yeah.
again, we haven't looked at the why, right? It's just, well, we used to, and this worked before.
Right. That's
But
true. Yeah.
the world has changed, and that's what I
Yeah.
mean about a reality check.
Right.
Our potential has changed. Technology has changed. The way that we think about work has changed.
Mhm.
And so if we don't take time to unpack that and to ask those questions and to, I mean, I don't have a simple answer. It's complicated right now, right?
Well, but I'll ask you this. Where do you think this process starts? The asking this why question, which goes into value and mission and all those things. So if you're an organization and if you're advising an organization, where do you think they should start? Who is one person who needs to think about this first before anybody else does?
Oh, well, I think it has to come from leadership, right?
Exactly.
Because
right. Yeah.
that's the power dynamic, right? The questions have to be asked by leadership. But who are they asking the questions to? Who are the conversations?
That's a great question.
It's not just leadership to leadership.
Yeah,
right?
That's true. Right.
Right?
Yeah.
Because if you have, just a real simple example would be if you have an employee who's coming in late every single day, 15 minutes late every single day, and then eventually they get written up or, put on suspension or there's some kind of repercussion from that.
Sure.
If you don't take the time to ask that employee why, not just to say this is unacceptable, but to maybe take a few minutes to say, what's the problem? And it happens to be that they that their childcare doesn't open until a certain time, so it's really almost impossible for them to get there. And then you start to have that discussion about like, well, maybe we can adjust your hours, or maybe there are some other, But if you don't give the person an opportunity to, if you don't connect with them, if you don't understand their story, right?
That's true.
If you don't get to know them a little bit and look for the answer, the why, then you're going to run into the same problem over and over again.
Exactly. Because they engage with their why. Even as people in the company engages with their employees with their why, they bring their own why. And they need to somehow, not necessarily, it doesn't have to be the same why, but they need to understand each other, that this is your why and this is my why. This is why we are together here. Right. This is why we are co-working here in the same space, so it's within the same company. Right.
And you just said co-working, right? It has to be a good match.
Yes.
And sometimes the match is made because one person needs somebody that has a specific technical skill, or a person needs a job for financial stability and healthcare, right?
Sure.
Sometimes sometimes the match is not even.
Sure.
Right?
Exactly. Right. Yeah.
We would love for it to be a 50-50 split. I'm bringing as much to this position as I am receiving from it. We know that's not always the case. But in a case where, the company feels like it is giving more or accepting less, then there needs to be an investigation that happens instead of just assumptions that are being made. Because it is expensive to hire people.
Yeah.
It's expensive to go through a training process.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
When there could possibly be a small adjustment that's made that might really change the story altogether.
That's true. Yes. Yeah. So if you went to this organization and you said the leader of the organization, the leadership of their organization, and typically in most corporate structure, the buck stops with one person. Right. So it's he or she, CEO, founder, whoever. That's one person who's the pyramid. I don't know if it'll be like that 20, 30, 50, 100, 500 years from now, but that's how it is today, right? So that's what we have to deal with. So this person, what do you think is the importance of this person, this leader, he or she, the CEO, the top leader, the top guy or gal in this organization, to have gone through their own this kind of a process that you speak of, the storytelling, the self-discovery process, the self-actual. How important is it for them to have to go through this process, for them to be able to build an effective culture that you speak of around some of these values and missions and those kinds of things that we're talking about.
Yeah, I think it's extremely important, but I think it looks different for everyone. Sometimes people
Yes,
have gone through this process because they are an entrepreneur and they have
that's
figured
true.
out, they have already carved their own path.
That's
Um,
true.
and sometimes people have been really involved in the mission of the company, right? Like
Yeah,
this
yeah.
origin stories apply to businesses and products as much as they apply to individuals as
Mm.
well, right?
So let
So,
me stop you right there. I think you said something
yeah,
very important. So I think what you're saying is that the origin story of a product is also a story. So
yeah,
origin's a story of a service or a concept or an idea, right?
right.
Is that what you're saying? That's fascinating.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
I mean, you hear origin stories being
yeah.
told about, how Apple got started in a
Right.
garage or
That's true.
Nike
Right.
got started out of a trunk of a car
Yeah,
or
yeah.
Spanx is a good one as well,
Right,
like cutting off the bottoms of pantyhose,
right.
those kinds of origin stories
Yeah,
exist as well.
yeah.
And in those are some inherent values or, implications of
Yeah,
a problem being solved or innovation, right?
right. Sure, sure.
And I think for leadership, it's often a question of, more focused on the business side of things,
Sure, that's
why we
true.
are coming together to
Yeah,
provide this service or this
yeah.
product.
Sure, sure.
But that doesn't always carry through
Uh-huh.
or permeate the culture
Sure.
of the company,
Yeah,
right? I mean, I'm
it's
sure
true.
you've heard lots of cases where we say one thing, but we're not
Mm-hmm.
actually we're not
Yeah,
actually living by those standards
right.
or that mission,
Yeah.
which is, I think, in why there's a lot of conflict in some
That's true.
workplaces.
Unless the story is authentic. We're talking
Right.
about authenticity here. So if the
Right.
CEO goes through this, if we're just giving this a lip service, and everybody has a mission statement on their website, right, on their about page,
Right.
but
Right.
it's a lot of that is nonsense. Like, let's face it, right?
Right.
So because they're just putting out things that other people want to hear, nobody reads them, nobody
Yeah.
connects with them, and I think that my take on this is that if the story is authentic, then people will connect with it.
Right.
Even if it's not their story. Point being that if I'm an employee wanting to work for Apple, if they've written an authentic story, which is authentic to them, and they're speaking the truth, I will connect with that from my own authenticity.
Right.
I don't know if you have any take on that. And you can disagree with me, by the way. I'm
No,
kind
absolutely.
of...
I mean, I think it goes back to that matchmaking, right?
That's true. That's true.
And I think that's one of the reasons that we see people really hungry to get to know people on social media, for
Yes.
example.
Sure.
You
Sure.
can't really hide behind, here's a good example. This
Yeah.
whole Victoria's Secret business, right?
Uh-huh.
Of like, Victoria has a secret, like,
Yeah.
she was made up by a dude. There's a whole song about it,
Tell us that story. Yeah, I've
right?
not heard that story.
Okay, so Victoria's Secret, it turns out that the owner of the company, I'm not remembering his name or the person who started,
Right.
was a man
Yeah.
who created this persona called Victoria. She never existed,
Okay.
right? But they came up with a photo and a biography and everything and pretended that that Victoria was a real person. There's an entire documentary about it. And then a songwriter, Jax, came out with this song called I Know Victoria's Secret.
Oh,
She was made up by a dude.
I have
right?
not heard that story. Yeah.
Yeah. And so you get this conflict. Now all of a sudden, since this documentary is circulating, there's an authenticity problem.
Yeah,
right?
that's
People
true.
are having a hard time with the idea of this brand who is
Yeah.
like stood for women's, freedom of
Right.
expression and,
Yeah.
empowerment,
Yeah.
to have a man behind the company the whole time and who had lied and made up this story
Right.
about this person, Victoria, right? So it creates a
Yeah.
whole conflict because on one hand you're saying, we have this integrity and
Yeah.
we believe in this empowerment. On the other hand, you're just lying,
That's
right?
true.
So
Right.
so can we believe you? Do we trust in
Yeah.
you? Do we want to buy your products? Now we have a
Yeah.
conflict of our
Yeah.
own integrity of whether we want to support a company that operates in this manner.
Sure.
That is not authentic, right?
That's true. If you were advising the founder, the CEO of this company, right, Victoria's Secret, and they say, okay, let's turn this around. The first question is there a way to come out of this? And what would you tell them? How do you retell that story, if you would, if there is such a thing?
Well, I think it gets tricky because for what happened was when Jax, the songwriter, came out with this song,
right.
I believe it was the CEO. It was a woman in leadership at the company.
Right.
Wrote her a handwritten note to say, I agree with you and we're going to do better. And within 6 months, she was gone from the company. Right?
Yeah. Right.
So you have people who are inside of these companies and systems that maybe are trying to follow that authentic leadership role, and they have a board of directors or somebody else right behind them saying, oh no, this is gonna cut into our bottom line. Then there becomes like an internal struggle. So getting everyone on the same page. I mean, I thought that was a great way to respond and to earn back the trust of the clients and, the consumers in that case. But as a result of her just leaving the company, resigning after a very short period of time, then I think it leaves us with even more questions about, what's going on behind the scenes there.
That's true.
Right?
That's true.
Transparency is so important, or, as being as transparent as possible.
Right. I think what I'm hearing you say is, Carrie, that you had to, as much as possible, try to get it right from the bottom up. Because once you have a company of certain size and you've grown on that lie, and then it's very difficult to go back and fix that story.
Yeah.
Right? Start with the right story. So if, I work with a lot of businesses they've gone beyond their initial years of struggle. They've gone to 20 employee to 50 employee. And then they are in this range of the 200 to 500 employee companies. And they're not big boys yet. And that probably is the right time to begin to kind of go within and do some sort of soul searching and tell your story, your authentic story from the inside out.
Yeah.
Right. Or maybe even from the beginning, when you're starting the business, like, yourself, you are, as a brand, personal brand, as you, Carrie, right?
Yeah.
You've done this work, and then you build on that work, right? Wherever you go with your career, right? So,
well, the truth is that if you don't tell your story, someone will tell it for you.
And it may not be the one that you like.
Exactly, right? So the adjectives that are used to describe you, or what people assume about your values, the more clear you can be and the more confidently you can express that and communicate those ideas to people, then you get to control your own narrative, right? And that's what I mean. You mentioned that at the very beginning. If you change your story, you can change your life, right? If I clarify my values and I make sure that I am making decisions in support of those values, then I'm going to change my life, right? Because I'm no longer conflicted. I'm no longer going to take a job where I feel like I'm being disrespected, because one of my core values is respect, right? To give it and to receive it. And so when I'm in a situation where that's not happening, then it becomes clear to me very quickly what decisions need to be made in those circumstances.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And then what I like about this, what I love about this conversation, is that we've actually, change your story, change your life. We've actually expanded. It's the same words, but we expanded the definition of what that means. Change the story of you, the career person, but also to change the story of you, the company, business, organization, and also to change the story of the product and the service that you're offering, right? Any entity has a story because its origin has an origin. It's going to potentially have an ending at some point. So it's come into existence, it's going to go out. The story of that. And so it applies a broad definition. So when you change the story of that, you also change the life of that.
Absolutely.
Right. So something just popped in my head, and I really want to get your view on this. One thing, last year, this movie came out, Barbie, right? And
Yeah.
I was blown away by it because that's such an unbelievable example of what you're talking about. Is that true, or is that to Mattel? Is that a good story, or do you think, or what do you think? Does it fit your definition of a good storytelling from the inside out?
So I think that's a really interesting example
Uh-huh.
that really highlights how
Right.
complicated it can be when
Sure.
you do clarify or
Yeah.
when you take those steps to evolve and change. I
It's
really see
true.
the Barbie movie as an example of a story in evolution, right?
Ah,
And
yes.
I
Yeah.
talk about evolution a lot because I don't think we always give ourselves grace to change our mind and to
Mm-hmm.
become a better version of ourselves, to
Yes.
leave
Yes.
things behind, right?
Right. Right.
So Barbie is in a state and has been for as long as I've really known about Barbie to be
Mm-hmm.
in a state of becoming a better Barbie, a better
Ah,
version of
yeah.
Barbie,
I love
right?
it.
As a
Yeah.
result of reflecting the
Yeah.
ideals of, um, you know, women in society,
Sure.
potential, what are independence. And
Yeah.
so there are a lot of people who have grown up with other ideas
Mm-hmm.
of Barbie and they
Yeah.
haven't had that reality check. Maybe they
Right.
haven't looked at the younger generations to understand their value system, what they
Sure.
stand for, what they're
Sure.
interested in promoting.
Yeah.
And so there's a real conflict happening in people seeing that movie and saying, well, this is not Barbie. This doesn't
Right.
represent,
Right.
because they have not updated, they have not
Mm-hmm.
evolved their ideas of Barbie
That's
as
true.
she relates to a modern world, right?
That's
And
true.
so for those of
That's true.
us who kind of have been keeping up or maybe have young children, I have 3
Mm-hmm.
girls,
Uh-huh.
right?
I
To
have to.
see
Yeah.
to see a Barbie
Yeah.
who is so just brash and confident
Yeah.
is really exciting because
Yeah.
that was not necessarily our perception of her growing up when I
Mm-hmm.
had Barbies as a kid.
Yeah.
And I wasn't honestly that excited about playing with them because I didn't feel
Right.
like they were a good representation of me as a
Yes.
person.
That's true.
Um, and now I think that, there are a lot of options for this idea of Barbie relating to the world and the kind
Mm-hmm.
of, you can do anything, but also struggling to relate to some of the ideas that we have about feminism and
Yeah.
independence and equality. That is an ongoing conversation as well. So I'm excited just
Yeah.
excited about these
Where this.
conversations happening to
Right.
begin
Right.
with.
And on that note, where do you think we're going? Now, you just said that I don't like to predict the future,
Right.
and so, but if you had a crystal ball and you could
Sure.
see where, so from so many, so we just give an example. So that could be one thread, right? Something
Right.
like this, that were the cultural phenomenon. So the definition of what it means to be telling these stories, story of self, through self-exploration, right? Me in the center. So then we have this AI thing right now, right? So if you can just take a crack at where do you think, what's the importance of storytelling in the age of AI? In the coming months and years and decades, centuries.
So there's an interesting phenomenon happening when we have a new invention or the pendulum kind of swings in one direction.
That's
We
true.
also almost immediately have kind of a reaction to that, or the
Mm-hmm.
pendulum swing in the other direction. So what
Yeah.
I'm seeing is an urge, an instinct to go back to face-to-face and in-person
Yeah.
events, right?
Sure.
Storytelling
Yeah.
is not going anywhere.
Yeah.
Storytelling has existed since the beginning of time.
Uh-huh.
It exists around every campfire,
Yes,
around,
that's true.
every major event, every
Yeah.
toast that happens, right?
Right.
And so I think that there will be a real opportunity for people to get face to face,
Yes.
whether it's a TED
Yeah.
Talk or a
Yeah.
Moth storytelling night. I think more of these are going
Yeah.
to, these kinds of events are going to exist
Sure. Yeah.
where people
Yeah.
can be person to person because, as much as I enjoy, meeting someone virtually and having these conversations,
Yeah.
the energy that is exchanged and the potential for connection in a live space is
Yeah.
something that is just can't be denied.
Absolutely.
And the
It's
potential
different.
it's
Yeah.
electric, right?
Oh, yeah. Sure. Oh, yeah. 100%. There are limitations to, me seeing you in that little square and vice
Yeah.
versa. And
Yeah.
there are limitations to the medium or
Right.
any medium. And there's no substitute for, sitting down for a cup of coffee face to face or around the water cooler.
Right,
in the
exactly.
corporate world, right? And
Yeah.
exchanging stories because we love stories. We still do. And I think you're right. I think we always will.
Well,
So,
and AI is a great tool. I wouldn't
Yeah.
discourage anyone from exploring it and
Yeah.
using it as a resource. But,
Sure.
just like when Wikipedia started and everyone was like, well, use with caution, right?
Right.
It's a resource and a
That's
tool.
true.
It's not the end product.
That's true.
And it's been proven to not really understand
Yeah.
the real potential and power of storytelling.
No,
It's just
100%.
not that good.
Yeah.
So
It's
that's why
not.
you need people like me to
Yeah.
help you out.
Our jobs are secured, you and me both.
Yes,
Right?
exactly.
So,
Like both of us.
if someone wants to get in touch with you, how do they? First of all, what are some of the things that you want to engage with people about? What are the topics that you're passionate about right now? And how do they
Absolutely.
connect with you to talk about those things?
So I am interested in storytelling strategy, right?
Mhm.
So really thinking about what story you want to tell,
Yeah.
how you're going to tell it, and why you're going to tell it.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
so that looks like coaching and workshops and classes
Sure.
that I teach. The book is available on Amazon and
Amazon.
Audible and all of that.
Sure.
And if people want to get in touch with me, I'm on all of your traditional social media forums at Carrie Klewin, and my website is very easy to find as well at carrieklewin.com.
And we'll put all of the information in the show notes that will be accompanying this episode when we publish it. So all the information will be there, and we'll provide a good summary. I like to do a deep dive along with the episode. So there'll be a written version of a lot of the things that we talked about, and so we'll put that together. And any parting words before we end the episode today?
I really encourage people to take a moment to think about something that makes you truly original and share that. And, really just give yourself an opportunity to see what connections you can make. Whether it's something, one of those little known facts.
Yeah.
If I tell you, like, I played bassoon when I was younger and was
Right.
an NCAA cheerleader and lived in Thailand. I
Yeah.
mean, what conversations would those start, right?
Yeah, sure.
So don't be afraid to share those little known facts and just connect with people.
Great. I hope our listeners will take that to heart, as I do, as I'm always on the explorative journey of authenticity. I'm always trying to find out, what is the authentic stuff about me? What's my core? And I invite our listeners to do the same as Carrie has done. And so thank you very much for being on this episode. This was a blast of a conversation.
Thank you.
This was a great conversation. I really enjoyed it. I really did. And I got to explore some of the things I've been wanting to explore for a long time with
Awesome.
someone. And you were my victim. So
Yeah.
And what is it like? I like to get a sense of sitting in that chair as
Yeah.
I'm asking these questions. What was that like? If you can go back into that, where's the emotions or sensations, or what did it feel like to be in this situation of being asked these questions, being interviewed, where you're being asked these questions and you're talking?
Pretty comfortable. Sometimes,
Okay.
just me on a personal level, I want to make sure that I'm answering the question. And so sometimes like when I'm asked a question, there's a little lead up to that and I want to react to that, but then I also
Right.
want to answer the question and virtually sometimes it's hard to have that more casual back and
Right.
forth of the conversation.
Sure.
I think that's just a virtual
That's there is, and this is why it takes so much time to make sure that we can hear each other and see each other properly, because it's so much a part of the conversation. It's just kind of being able to see the expressions on the face and all these things. And this was really hard for me when I'm a trainer and I was an in-person trainer for decades before I started getting in front of video. And I froze because I don't have that feedback that I'm used to. It's little things that, and I'm a pretty sensitive person, so I can quickly pick up what people, so I'll change on the spot.
Yeah, me too.
So, that feedback is so important to me. And sometimes it gets a little frustrating to kind of work through the limitations. And also,
you're really good about kind of asking the question and then exploring it a little bit and then asking it again, which is very helpful because my mind will start wandering and want to like respond to like 3 things. And I'm like, oh, wait, but that's the question I should,
Sure. Oh, good. That's good feedback. I always worry about how it lands because I feel that it's my responsibility to structure the conversation because there's a listener out there. And there's a focus to the podcast, which is business and culture and all that. And so it needs to be applicable to them. So then I talk, and in this conversation, I felt like I talked too much. And that's my own notes. When I do a self-analysis, I was saying, oh, stop talking so much. But sometimes some of those episodes are some of my best episodes when I talk quite a bit.
No, I think it was very like back and forth. I didn't feel like you talk too much at all.
Good.
Sometimes in interviews, it will feel more like a Q&A than a conversation.
Right.
And I like the fact that it felt more conversational. And I think, the podcast that I listen to, it's important to get to know the host as well. So, kind of answering the question or providing your insight is like super important. And that doesn't always happen. With hosts that I've been interviewed by.
Okay, sure, great.
Yeah, because I think it's different. Like you have an audience base, and they come to hear you, right? So
to the conversation,
exactly,
right, So, and it has to be relevant to them. They have an expectation as to why they're coming to, they click the button.
Exactly.